Hi, and welcome to my sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for June 2022, featuring some of the stories I read and loved in June. I want to start off by doing a bit of PR for a Kickstarter. It's the Kickstarter for Strange Horizons that's running right now to support them in publishing more awesome fiction and nonfiction. So check that out and support them if you can. And I'm going to dive right in. My first two stories are from Strange Horizons. And the first one is You, Me, Her, You, Her, I by Isabel J. Kim from Strange Horizons. This story starts out with this really haunting first lines. You are the unalive thing possessing her body. Her body was printed 3 days ago from blueprints transferred moments before the motorbike crash over the bridge. Her flesh and fat and keratin and bone are accurate to prior specifications, except for the absence of a few cosmetic scars on her arm, which her family had requested not be replicated. So this is a haunting, beautifully crafted story that dives deep into what it means to be a person, to be human, to be an artist. It's also a story that is very much about art and creativity, about how and why we make art, and where the ideas and the craft itself, where it sort of comes from in our lives. In Kim's story, an artificial intelligence, the unalive thing mentioned in the quote above, is inserted into the new body of Valentine, a young woman who recently died in an accident. The AI is only meant to inhabit Valentine's body for a couple focuses on the experience of the artificial mind that is inserted into the body and providing can return. But while inhabiting Valentine's life, the AI becomes ever more interested in Valentine's art, and then in art itself and how it is created and where the ideas and inspiration come from. This is a really thoughtful and thought-provoking story with an original take on sentient AIs and creativity. My next story pick is also from Strange Horizons, and it's The Harp by E.A. Petricone in Strange Horizons again, like I said. So in this story, we meet Mira and Mira's Nana, her grandmother, who performs a spirit concert on the first night of every month. Nana performed a concert for the spirits, and in exchange, they left Papa in this world. So there's been a deal made, so the story goes, between Nana and the spirits, but she has to play the harp every month to get Grandpa to stay in this world. But Mira, who is a young teenager, grumpy and sarcastic and quite happy to roll her eyes at the rest of her family, at her baby sister, her mom, her grandparents, everyone. Mostly, Mira just finds all these people embarrassing and boring, and she can't wait to get old enough to move out and get away from them. So when she is tasked with helping her grandmother prepare the harp for the spirit concert, well, she doesn't take the task very seriously. I love how Petricone captures Mira's teen state of mind, and then also captures what happens to Mira when the spirit concert goes horribly wrong. It's a sharp and dark story that was inspired actually by the artwork that accompanies it at Strange Horizons. My next story pick is Before Hand Meant Hand by Nathan Alling Long in Lackingtons. Now this is Lackingtons, sadly. It's their final issue. They will be sorely missed. And the theme for this final issue is prehistories. And in this story, we go back to a time before hand meant hand, and we simply had these things at the ends of our arms, which were not even called arms. So it's a story about humans living before developed language. And I love the slipstream rhythm of the story, and I love how evocative it is. It's a really mysterious thing to try to capture what life would be like for humans before the development of language as we know it, but there's a gorgeous lyrical quality to the story that is captivating, and I think does a good job of the intended purpose. It's a story that should be read, I think, rather than described. Now, you should dive into this story and the whole issue because, like I said, this is Lackington's final issue, and they will be missed. But thank you for the fiction, Lackingtons. My next story pick is Time Wolf Emit Flow by Anna Madden in Metaphorosis magazine. I love this very twisted and twisting story of a gate or portal and two worlds that have seemingly separated, ripped apart, and sundered from each other. In Time's world, there are memories of the Shapers, beings who brought technology and a better world, maybe. But the Shapers have disappeared, leaving Time's world to destruction and disarray. But Time is intent on finding a way to fix the polluted world and save its weakening inhabitants who take the shape of various creatures depending on their mood and need. I love shape-shifting, so this is really up my alley. And when Time finally managed to assemble and repair a Shaper gate, things take a very unexpected turn. It's a brilliant and wonderfully crafted story with luminous prose. My next story pick is Bring Your Own Spoon by Saad Hossein in Tasavvur. Well, I might have told you guys before that I love science fantasy, and I do. And this is a great example of a science fantasy story. In Bring Your Own Spoon, Bring Your Own Spoon is set in a nearish future version of Dhaka City, ravaged by pollution and environmental degradation. It's a place where people's lives are precarious, and where almost no one relies on growing their own food anymore, instead getting their sustenance from replicator-like machines. Oh, and did I mention there are jinn? So a great example of like that blend of science fiction and fantasy. In this world lives Hanu, who likes to cook, which is very unusual in this world, and he uses scavenged and naturally growing ingredients, which is seen as extremely suspect by most everyone else. Hanu is visited by Imbi, one of the jinn now inhabiting the world, and Imbi is so impressed with Hanu's cooking that he suggests he start a restaurant, something that seems impossible to Hanu, but which brings about all sorts of changes in his life. The story is a delightful and fabulous romp, I guess, in a way. It's even though it's set in this rather dystopic future, where the bright light and hope in the story, at least, is Hanu's cooking, which is fragrant with spices and mango and more. Like, seriously, Hussein's descriptions of smells and tastes are absolutely divine, and I want to eat everything described in the story. So please be ready to get hungry if you go and read this. My next story pick is The Projectionists by E.M. Linden in The Deadlands. Linden's story about life and death in a place where terrible things have happened and continue to happen is a quiet, lyrical ghost story that cuts really deep. Hassan is the main character and his father, and most of the people they know, they have all lost friends and family members, but it's impossible for them to express their grief or their anger openly for fear of repercussions. Linden expertly weaves together the stories of the ghosts with the stories of those left behind, with the past and present horrors of their stricken community. It's an excellent story from another excellent issue of The Deadlands. My next story pick, I'm lost in my own story here. My next story pick is Potamora in the Triad by Sarah S. Messenger in Fantasy Magazine. And it starts out like this. There are always three, the father, the unfather, and the child. That's why Vriskiab threw my unfather off his back after she bore my baby sister. or so Riskiab tells me when he stops in the shade of a dune, his massive scales warm under my calves and the tail of him stretching behind me for leagues. My baby sister is soft and crimson tacky in the crook of my arm. Now this is a luminous, mysterious tale of scaled creatures, some more snake and some more human, that are traveling a strange desert, haunted by the stories and myths and the fate that guides their lives and their actions. The narrator's sister, the child in the Triad, is named Baixirv, and as the narrator says, unlike me, she will have round pupils and no scales anywhere, not even in a thin line down her spine. In that way, she is just like our unfather. Now, the Triad mentioned in the story has a dark purpose that will spell doom for one of the three, and this haunts the narrator and her sister more and more. There's a great interview with the writer of the story, Sarah Messenger, in the Fantasy magazine, where she talks about her writing process and the inspiration behind the story. My next story pick is Linden in Effigy by Kay Chronister in the Dark. And it's this story. I love Kay Chronister's writing, and this is another excellent story. It's set in a small community where modern life is intertwined with ancient and ominous magic, and where the ceremonies and sacrifices in the local fen are a vital part of life. And when the local witch dies, her young daughter moves in with the local family, and the specter of the upcoming St. Agnes's Eve ceremony for the young women in the community looms large in everyone's mind. Laurie, who now shares a room with the witch's daughter, and Laurie's former, maybe, best friend Ellie, both dread the upcoming ceremony that will have dire implications for them, and even more dire implications for the community and maybe the world, if the girls don't go through with it. Ellie plans to escape whatever fate is laid out for her, but Laurie isn't so sure. This is an excellent horror story that brings ancient magic into our own world and time, and I love the focus here on the relationship between the young women and between them and the community. My next story pick is Quarrel by Hamilton Perez in Kaleidotrope. In the story, a father has lost his only child to disease, and grief-stricken, he heads out to sea again. He used to be a sailor, but he left that life to take care of his child. And now that his child is dead, he's back and tries to bury himself and his memories in the work on board ship. And it works for a while, even though memories and a song haunts him wherever he goes. Perez's story is this, it's just such a powerful tale of grief and loss, and the vivid details of life and work on board a sailing ship anchor the story's lyrical spirit in the real world. I love the feel and texture of the prose and the world in the story, and I love the mysterious nature of what happens at the end once we dive deep beneath the surface. My next story pick is The Bones Beneath by Vanessa Fogg in Podcastle. It's narrated by Tatiana Gray. I'm going to read a quote from the story. The bare field is on the outskirts of town several miles away, but she can still feel it as she walks to school. She feels the movement of buried bones there, the remains of the little creatures of the earth, mice, voles, and moles, things that once saw light and things that stayed underground, blind and digging, hidden things, forgotten things. And it was actually A.C. Weiss pointed out on Twitter that this very powerful and wrenching story by Vanessa Fogg, it's almost, you could see it almost be in a conversation, however unintended, with Linden's story that I mentioned previously, The Projectionist for the Deadlands. I love both these stories, and I highly recommend reading them back to back. In Fogg's story, we find ourselves in a community where terrible things have happened, and where regular people, everyday people, were the perpetrators of that horror. No one talks about what happened anymore, and everything is supposed to be fine and normal, even though it's not. And while the people try to stay silent, the bones buried in the ground are restless and keep surfacing, reminding everyone of what they would like to forget. My next story pick is A Belly Full of Spiders by Mario Coelho at Pseudopod, and it's narrated by Bryce Dale. Fair warning, first of all, that this is a horror story that is not an easy read. It involves terrible things being done to children, even though the details of what is being done are kept mostly off the page. These terrible things are only too real if you read the papers or listen to the news, and need no supernatural monsters as perpetrators. Coelho is well aware of this, and in the story, the supernatural presence, Lord Gone, is of a different kind than you might expect. Lord Gone seems like a monster at first, at least, tormenting Davy in the dank basement where he has lived most of his life. But Coelho twists and turns our expectations expertly in the story, and I really love how we get to follow Davy from the basement and past the point when you might think the story should end. It's not a story about hopelessness and insurmountable evil. In the end, it's a way more nuanced and complex story than that. Highly recommended. My next story pick is, Excuse Me, This is the Quiet Car by Kara Mast at Cast of Wonders, and it's narrated by Lalana Dara. And if you've ever been really annoyed with the people who break the obvious publicly posted rules and disregard the care and comfort of others in public places, such as a train, this story is definitely for you. People are supposed to be quiet in the quiet car, and when someone breaks that rule, the other passengers in the story try to correct them. But what happens if the offender ignores them? And what if the offender doesn't even care about the rules or who they inconvenience? This story is both dark and hilarious, and it has a very satisfying ending. My next story pick is Safe Places by Sylvia Heike in Martian, the magazine of science fiction drabbles. Now, because this is a drabble, I'm going to have a very short mention of it. Please go read it. Please go read the rest of the drabbles there. It's a wonderful zine. Safe Places is a wrenching sci-fi drabble, and I love the obscured words here and the way that the horror of what is happening is both revealed and hidden at the same time. My next story pick is another story from the Deadlands. This is To Build Eternity with Bones by Gunnar de Winter, again from the Deadlands. And it starts off like this. Every summoning is a deal with the Bone Baron. I see him dance toward us across the floes of ice. No one else on the ship can see him. I'm the only necromancer. So, first off, I highly recommend actually that after reading the story, maybe go and read the Winter's intriguing story notes. I'm going to and to quote the story notes, the story's protagonist is a young, promising necromancer looking to make a name for herself. Necromancers are a small but powerful guild in the story's world, respected, feared even, and also greeted with suspicion and superstition. And from this premise, De Winter weaves a bone-shivering tale, quite literally, about a necromancer hunting for a legend. It's a story about death and bones, gigantic bones, and what it might cost you to reanimate them. It's also a story about love and desire and ambition. And I love the voice and the vibe of the story, and I love the necromancer's relationship with the Bone Baron, who is the patron saint of necromancers. My next story pick is There Are No Monsters on Rancho Buena Vista by Isabel Cañas in Nightmare. This is a deliciously wicked story about Rosario and what happens when a man stalks her in order to find out her secrets. Cañas tells the story with such panache and with such a biting sense of dark humor that it had me charmed from the first sentence to the last. My final story pick this month is Into the Thunder by Michelle Munzler, in Beneath Ceaseless Skies. And, you know, there are simply not enough stories about people riding domesticated monster/dinosaurs in speculative fiction, so I always rejoice when I read such a story. Münzler gives us a rip-roaring, swaggering tale of Svenok and Olva, two outriders on a mission, riding their raptors when they run into some very dangerous thunderclaws. I love absolutely everything about this story. From the inspired curse words to the way Münzler incorporates her world and character building into the action of the story, to the understated sense of humor. I also love how the very contrary nature of the raptor mount pays off at the end of the story. This is just fantastic storytelling, and it's set in a world that I immediately wanted to see more of, with a duo of characters I would follow into any adventure. And that's it. That was all my story picks for June. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll be back next month. Thanks so much.